Yes, she does.
If we could please stand for a moment of silence and the pledge to allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for being here. I don't.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. We have Mr.
I don't have another one, not with me.
We have Mr. Yocum, and Mr. Yocum, our discussion of the audit committee is first up. So would you like to speak now? Thank you.
I'm here as an individual. I'm not speaking for the audit committee. I've sent you information about to discuss that item on the agenda, and I think I've given you all the facts, and really what I want is just get clear direction from you folks about which way you want to go. My experience has always been working in internal audit as a cost savings function with doing operational audits. Tom Mock has created a list that shows you saved about $10–11 million over the last 10 years. And I review that, and so if you calculate that out, it's probably over 100 teachers that internal audit has functioned. I mean, I would think the union would be down here saying we want more auditors. But that's my function, but I kind of sense that maybe that isn't as driving a need anymore since we now have better bond rating, thanks to some of the policies that you've had. And I just want you to go ahead, have a discussion, and give the direction to us before we engage applicants to interview for the opening for internal audit director. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Ward?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, everybody. Get the presentation started for Internal Audit Committee. Try to keep this brief this morning and then give you guys an opportunity to speak. Okay. First, I just wanted to cover the statutes because they can be a little bit confusing. Florida Statute 218.39 establishes a requirement for an audit committee when selecting an external auditor. The external auditor would be the one that's required to do our annual financial report audit each year. Florida Statute 1001.42 requires an internal auditor for each school district that has over $500 million in annual revenues, and that includes federal, state, and local. And we are above that threshold, therefore we are required to have an internal auditor. And the statute also says that that internal audit is to prepare reports and findings and report those directly to the school board or its designee. So it gives flexibility in who that internal auditor reports to. And then I just followed up with, there's no statutory requirement to have an internal audit committee, because I think people sometimes confuse that, and they think because we're required to have an internal auditor, we're also required to have an internal audit committee. But there is nothing in statute that says that.
The requirement to have the audit committee when selecting an external auditor, does it speak to who the composition of that committee must be?
It does.
Can the board be a committee, or do we actually have to have?
It says the CFO cannot be on that committee. It does say one board member and then two other members. Not board members, but it could be staff, it could be community, it could be that's optional. So it requires at least 3 people.
At least 3 people, one of which could be a board member.
One of them could be a board member, and then 2 other people other than the CFO.
And how would those people get appointed? By the
It would be
chair? Or
however the board chooses.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So why did we make the change? We made the change to policy that took the board representation away.
because it was a issue with the internal audit committee, because that's ongoing, whereas this committee is a one-time committee. It selects the auditor, and then it pretty much just doesn't do anything else unless if you wanted to do anything else.
Only for selecting the auditor.
But in that committee, when you do that, you're going to have to meet all the sunshine requirements. So if you select a board member, that board member is in the sunshine, so that board member cannot talk with the other committee members while they're going through that process to select an external auditor.
So
Unless
right
there's
now,
a-
when you're talking about the audit committee, you're talking about only to select an internal auditor,
No, only to select an external auditor.
external
Yes,
auditor?
ma'am. So-
Okay.
Okay?
So we could, wait a minute. So we can have an external auditor and not an internal auditor? Or we have to have the internal auditor?
We have to have an internal auditor. We do not have to have an internal audit committee.
Okay.
We have to have an external auditor, and when we select that external auditor, we have to use a committee to do that, per statute.
So those audits that we commission out, that we contract, that is chosen by the committee?
No, so just the annual financial report audit that we have to do with Purvis Gray, that one has to be selected by committee. And you don't have to reselect every year. We have an ongoing contract with them, so we don't have to have a committee constantly operating to select an external auditor.
So that committee might just convene every couple or few years or so.
Every 5 years,
Based on
and then decide whether they want to keep the existing auditor or whether they want to select a new auditor.
So to be clear, we are required to have an internal auditor, and we can choose to have a second external auditor as well.
No, you're required to have.
One or the other.
You're required to have an external auditor.
Okay.
And the external auditor is required to do the annual financial report every
Right,
year.
but on the second bullet point, since we're over 500 million, aren't we required to then also have an internal auditor?
We are required to have an internal auditor, correct.
But can you not contract that out?
You can contract that out. You can contract that
So it doesn't have to be
function out.
staff. We just have to have.
Can be staff.
That is correct.
So
It
our-
can be staff, right?
It can be
It can be
staff,
employed, yeah.
or it can be contracted out.
Right.
It's up to the board.
But our internal auditor can be an external person? Sure. Contracted person, okay.
Sure.
That's just what I'm be clear on, okay.
Sure.
I think where I was getting a bit confused is this external part and internal part. The external is strictly the overview of the district. So just
That's the
mark that.
financial audit, yes, sir.
If we, under 100.42, decided to contract the internal auditor function,
Correct.
we can do that.
Yes, sir.
And who picks that? Who picks them?
That would be a board decision to pick.
So that wouldn't be the committee of the.
You could do, I would assume you would do, the external audit committee could pick the internal audit also.
So it's
Or
gonna
you could
have-
direct the superintendent's staff to go bring in a couple of.
It could go through purchasing
Sure,
to get requests for proposals. And
sure. Yes, sir.
okay, all right, perfect.
Okay. All right. So just kind of give some options, internal audit committee options. We can maintain the current structure. We could eliminate the audit committee. The internal auditor would report directly to the board and present reports and findings in the board through workshops. Or you could eliminate the audit committee. The internal auditor would report directly to the board's designee and present reports and findings to the board through workshops. And I think that was Mr. Yoakum's recommendation that he provided to the board. I felt like it would be good to kind of go over what the kind of audits we are already receiving and what they mean and what they do. I don't want to read this all word for word because there's a lot in there, but you can see, most importantly, our financial audit, it's audited annually. One of the good things about the way that is done is it's rotated every 3 years. In industries other than ours, it's common to try to rotate your external auditor so often so that you get a different set of eyes and a different set of procedures on it. But the fact that we have the Auditor General coming in once every 3 years, they're state auditors, they're commissioned by the legislator, and so you're getting basically 2 audit firms' perspectives on a rotation basis through the district. So that helps reduce audit risk. Internal control effectiveness. Vance talks a lot about the Fortune 500, and it's a little bit different when you audit governments because they have Sarbanes-Oxley and a lot of things that they have to follow. We have a lot of things that we have as governmental auditors and governmental accountants we have to follow. And one of those is they actually have to come in and review the effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting. And that's a little bit different than a non-governmental type audit. And that also helps reduce risk in the audit field. Hold on, it's going to take me a couple minutes. Federal project compliance, they come in on a rotation basis and they look at our major federal programs annually. Both external, the Auditor General and Purvis Gray. So they hit our Title I, our ESE, our food service. They hit all of our ESSER stuff. So they've hit those throughout the years. And they look for, obviously, findings and compliance issues, not meeting the standards, the guidelines of the projects. But they also have a requirement that if anything that's over $10,000, they have to report on that. So if they find something that they question the cost on, it's not properly supported, it wasn't properly executed, or was used for the wrong purpose, if it was over $10,000, they would have to include that in the audit. IT audits are audited annually with financial audit. Both Purvis Gray and the Auditor Generals, they look and test our IT functions to make sure that our financial compliance is working correctly. The Auditor General also does an extensive, every 3 years, they look not only at the controls and the internal working of the softwares, but they make sure that the facility is accurate, that there's proper security, that the servers work correctly, and they're protected from things like outside attacks and stuff like that. So there's a lot of IT auditing that goes on. Compliance audit. The Auditor General refers to it as an operational audit, but it really is mainly a compliance audit. And it's checking to make sure that we're complying with all the Florida statutes mainly. But it does also look to make sure that we're complying with federal and state and local, including your policy. So they test things. And if you look at any of our compliance audits or the Auditor General's operational audits, they have about 3 pages of different things that they've looked at in our district every 3 years. And it's a very extensive compliance audit. Internal accounts audit, again, ongoing every year. They look at our internal accounts at our schools, and that's performed by Purvis Gray. Even when the Auditor General comes in and does the audit, they're only looking at the external. Purvis Gray still conducts the internal audit for us. And then the operational audit, which is a continuous basis, and that's your internal audit function. And that could include financial, operational compliance, depending on the risk assessment that's done by the internal auditor. School internal accounts audits, this is done by my staff. This is not an independent audit. We train and we also perform. We review all their. We make sure that they have every month they're balancing their checking accounts, and we look at their revenues to make sure they're reported timely and recorded correctly, and we also look at expenditures too. And then federal projects monitoring. All of our federal projects get monitored either by the Federal Oversight Agency, being USDOE or Department of Agriculture or whoever's handling food service at the time, and then also Department of Education, State of Florida, sends out monitors, and they monitor a lot of our projects. They could be federal, it could be state. So we do get a lot of monitoring from the state on a lot of our operations that we do. Any questions on the types of audits? The point of a lot of this that we're talking about is really to guide the internal audit function on a lot more of the operational stuff, because we have a pretty good coverage of external audits on most of the other areas like financial, federal, and compliance. Next slide. Not cooperating. We had to come up with a better system.
I know, because last time I had to stand
Stand back there.
Yep.
There you go. It went.
No, if you stand there, it'll work.
Yeah.
So,
I had to do it for
Oh,
vendors.
that's right.
So internal auditor options, I just thought I would list some advantages and disadvantages. We could hire a certified internal auditor, a CIA, or a CPA. The advantages would they typically understand the best practices for performing the audits independently. And the disadvantages right now is it's hard to find a candidate with relative school, board, or governmental experience. So there's always that learning curve when people come in and they have to learn a lot about what we do. We could contract with a CIA, CPA. They understand the best practices from performing the audits. And sometimes if they're already working with other school districts, they may already have a variety of industry knowledge that's more relative to the government or school district experience. The disadvantage would require additional monitoring to ensure the audits and reports are relevant to the board's needs. You could hire a non-CPA, CIA person. It would add flexibility to hire someone with direct school district operational experience knowledge, but they may not be knowledgeable in practices in performing internal audits independently. So you lose some of that independence as you do that. And then another option would be to hire a non-CIA CPA that had experience with school districts, and then contract with a CIA CPA to carry out the more heavier internal audit function as the board sees the need. So that would allow the employee with the school district experience to manage the day-to-day functions while contracting out larger audits to the CIA CPA. And then the disadvantage of that would be cost. Next slide. Yeah, I think you click the little thing at the bottom. For whatever reason, it's a video and not anyway. So anyway, that was just, the last slide was just to give you guys an opportunity to talk and discuss amongst yourselves and then give us direction.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to present board member comments, Mrs. Luke was unable to be with us today, but she has a statement sharing her views. So, Ms. Challenger, would you share that with us, please?
I will. Ms. Luke said she was sorry she was unable to be here today. She is at Umatilla Elementary School with her son shooting rockets. In regard to the internal audit function and today's discussion, I am of the opinion we should hire a certified auditor. I am of the opinion that government experience is more important than Fortune 500 company experience. While I realize we are a billion-dollar industry, our funding is very different than the business sector, and that understanding is more valuable. I think we have a great thing started with the internship partnership that will allow us to provide support for the auditor and potentially grow the department in the future as the district continues to grow and the needs become beyond the scope of the auditor. I believe the auditor should report to the board. They are our only employee and should be directed by us as a check and balance. While I have no issue with the current superintendent and staff, I do believe we should be vigilant in protecting the district in the future. And while a new board could easily adjust policies we have in place, the integrity of having a board auditor that is internal and reports to us makes me feel like we have an established practice that if a future board decided to change, the public could question and hold accountable. I would prefer an internal auditor to an external so that we have an employee who works with staff to schedule necessary meetings and knows the mission and vision of the district. They also are more flexible about objectives for audits, which, in my opinion, we struggle with as a board. An outside auditor would require a decisive list of objectives to have an audit that is functional and provides valuable information. Going forward, we should be clear about what we are hoping to gain from audits. I also believe that the financial audits are covered by outsourced audits already, as seen in the presentation, and that more operational audits could result in more cost savings, and that an outside auditor might have more difficulty getting information. In regard to the audit committee, I have much to say, but will try to keep it limited. First, Vance Yocum owes Tracy Carrasquillo an apology for the profanity he used towards her at the last meeting. His intention to direct the board oversteps his function as an appointed committee member representing one board member. While I know he is passionate about his opinions about the internal audit function and the committee, they are just that. Committee members who are not CPAs are easily valuable contributors to the 80-plus audits that Tom has conducted on topics such as Chromebook inventory, ESOL operational audits, printers, custodial services, Medicare payments, and Title IX, to name a few. While they all have financial implications, they do not require an auditor's expertise to understand or comment on. Similarly, our diverse board is able to lean on strengths found in the individual representatives that wouldn't exist if we were all principals or teachers or business people. A diverse representation of professions provides the audit committee insight into the operational audits that are a large part of the work that Tom and the board are tasked to do. The fact that Vance doesn't like the makeup of the committee and that people have stopped coming as a result of his demeanor isn't an indicator that the audit committee itself is a failure. I do agree there are some structural changes that could take place. My audit committee member and I meet for lunch to discuss the audits, and she keeps me readily informed rather than having to have a board rep to convey the information that the audit committee discusses, which was, to my understanding, the intention of the audit committee. Therefore, the change to the makeup of the committee should not impact the committee's effectiveness either. Obviously, I am at the will of the board, and while I could get behind having an internal auditor and not an audit committee, I do think the representation today by Mr. Yocum particularly has portrayed a false narrative about what the audit committee's function is and their ability to perform it, which gives me a moment's pause in making a decision to disband it. I also feel that canceling all of the interviews that were organized for the position has obviously led us to have no candidates and send a poor message about the disorganization and dysfunction of the board. We tasked the audit committee with a job, and I'm disappointed that everything was put on hold after communication was made with candidates. Again, I'm sorry I can't be there to have more conversation regarding this, but wanted to provide the board with my opinions regarding what the audit committee has turned into and my preference on an internal auditor reporting to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Challenger. Board members, I don't know if you would like to hear from Mr. Mock before we open it up to board discussion, or if you would. Okay. Mr. Mock, would you please share with us whatever concerns you might have?
My concerns range across a number of things, but one of the things I'll start with was something that recently happened in the news, and the New York Community Bank Corp recently came in the news as a bank that is currently potentially failing. I guess it hasn't failed completely, but their stock has dropped somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 80%. Now, what they're saying caused the failure at the bank is a lack of internal controls. The list that Mr. Ward just presented to you and the number of audits that a school district goes through, a bank probably goes through even more than that. So for them to have a failure in internal controls speaks to the volume of who's looking at the internal controls. And part of that may be, and I don't want to go into too much, but Sarbanes-Oxley's been huge on every internal auditor's radar outside of government because, Fortune 500 companies. So when you look at what operational type audits they do, I think we found out on the resumes that came in, and I didn't look at them, but I just heard the discussion about it, they had very little operational audit experience, and it was fairly heavy in Sarbanes-Oxley, which is really looking at financial controls. So I just start off with that. As far as the Director of Internal Audit, I support reporting to the school board. Not only is it the independence, but it's also the objectivity that an internal auditor needs to perform their job. So I look at not only as independent, but also objectivity. As far as the audit committee goes, I've received a lot of great input from the audit committee over my 10 years. Mr. Benny has been right there each and every year, talking to me, helping me along, providing the guidance that the board's not able to give directly. So to get that feedback from, your discussions with your audit committee member, then your audit committee member's more freely able, I think, to talk to me about that. And, it's not that I run with everything, but I take it into consideration. And as well as when we have one-on-one meetings as well during the audit planning, I mean, that's a great help as well to get a little bit inside of what you guys are thinking about. Because I found out, there's definitely 5 different ways of thinking about things on this panel up here. So reporting to both the audit committee and the school board has not been a problem for me. And I've found, the feedback from different people, because there's been people on the audit committee from government backgrounds, ones that have been working here at the district in the past and now are on the audit committee. Obviously, the financial understanding of government as well has been very helpful. So from that, I'll answer any other questions if I didn't cover anything that you were thinking you would like me to say.
Well, I just thought that we might like to hear from you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Mock?
I do. So as we're looking at a successor for you, and I'm sure you want to maintain the integrity of the job and the position.
Yes.
And I'm surprised you didn't see any of the resumes. That surprises me.
Well, I was asked not to be part of the interviewing, hiring process, I believe, by 2 people. So I stayed out of that. I was trying to help with the process only, which is, helping the audit committee with the steps
Who asked you not to
along.
be part of it? Because it seems like you would know.
Well, there was comments made. I guess there was just comments made. I'll just leave it there. I'm not going to point out anybody or throw anybody under the
Okay,
bus.
well, let me just say this. I think you should be involved because you're picking your successor and you know the questions.
Well, there was no, yeah, and to that, there was no board decision for me to be a part of that, so.
I don't remember us talking about
And that was 2 years. 2 years ago, I was in here with a presentation of the future of the internal audit department. If you remember, I had slide programs. I gave a couple options. I mean, maybe I gave too many options, but just to let you know, the intern's been great. I mean, let me tell you that, one of those options wasn't necessarily an intern, but it was bringing someone in at a low level to help with the administration and the work papers that are done conducting an audit. And I found out, I mean, she's really caught on quick to how to do work papers. I'm still guiding her, making, little things, that she needs to add to work papers. But, I mean, she's jumped on that. And trust me, there's a lot of work to putting together your work papers. And that's where, some of the little disagreement between Vance and I, he says, you can do an audit in 2 weeks. Well, you can't. I mean, if you're going to do it properly, to put the proper support behind your audit findings, you need those work papers. And they're just not, you just can't do them like that, especially when you're digging through internal accounts for information and other documents, so.
What audits, well, I don't know how the risk assessment, what it would look like if you put together a year, but what audits in your mind could not be done by us contracting out, or outsourcing?
Not be done?
Could not. Are there any that
No,
your
you could-
position specifically, being inside, specifically supports?
No, no. I mean, you could do any audit externally with a CPA firm or a professional audit firm. I don't want to necessarily say CPA, but there are other professional audit firms out there.
What are the pluses or negatives, in your opinion, to that, if we were to outsource?
Negatives, just that, well, I think Scott brought it up. I think you have to come up with the objectives of the audit. So from this panel up here, what do you want the audit to accomplish? Because they don't know. I mean, if you say, do an audit at, in this area, okay, they're going to say, well, what's the audit objectives? How much do you want us to look at? Do you want us to look at a year, 2 years, 3 years? Kind of like the medical claims audit. So, just outlining exactly what they want to do. So you'll have to have that clearly defined and provided to them. Other than that, I mean, they're going to find the resources to do that audit.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for your service.
You're welcome.
Mr. Dodd?
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts, and I think we've got a lot of different topics to possibly discuss. I think one of my initial observations is just how distant the board becomes with the internal auditor when you also have this committee going on as well. So from my experience, when I was in that room, when I was the vice chair, I didn't see a great level of detail or discussion about the audits that you had presented. And then when they come to the board, there's even less discussion. That oftentimes we don't see these on workshops for some period of time, or often maybe you're last on the agenda and we're eager to get out, or whatever it is. So therefore, then it relies really on the board member getting something from their proxy, from you. So now, I mean, in court, that'd really kind of be like hearsay, right? That I'm not getting it directly. And so, so I think that really kind of distances the board member from really understanding what this looks like. Sure. And so if I'm thinking about it, we have very few people who we actually pick or supervise or choose, right? I mean, we hire our counsel, we hire the superintendent. The auditor's the other one. And so since we don't have a lot of people we're really working with directly, I think that we have a bit of an obligation to work with this person directly, as opposed to having so much go through committee. I guess, I mean, just as I'm thinking about trying to just raise the quality in our knowledge of the inner workings, the closer we are to it, the more likely we are to be in that position. So.
Sure. I would agree. And that process you talked about has been a struggle for me for 10 years over those 80 audits. How do I get them to you guys quicker? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I email, once I go to the audit committee, which is probably the quickest process for me to get, once the audit's done, is get it in front of the audit committee. And then the next step is try to get on a workshop, which y'all have a lot to do. I mean, the superintendent has a lot of things that she needs to get before you. And if you're only doing a workshop every couple of months or so, it's hard to throw maybe 2 or 3 audits on there as well. And like you said, to go into them in more detail instead of, 3 slides, 4 slides, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think some of my concerns about the audits, at least that we've done internally, is that they're often very surface level, the reports that we get back. And
yeah.
And I think that, I've been having trouble finding, with the exception of a few audits that stand out in my mind, great value in what we've seen. And I think maybe that a large part of that is just dependent on the system that's in place, and working within that process.
Yeah. And defining it so the person knows what you're looking for too.
Yeah, and that's a real concern of mine, is defining those objectives. So when part of my career at Disney was spent auditing, and not from the financial side, that's not my strength, but rather attractions and safety practices and so on and so forth. And oftentimes I would discover that sometimes you didn't know what you didn't know until you got into the operation, and then as you're looking at something else stands out and says, wait a second here. What's that? Okay, I need to kind of chase that rabbit a little bit. And my concern with doing all of this externally is that they're not going to go chase those other rabbits that pop up, whereas somebody internally would, I think, have this different level of commitment to the organization as our own employee to say, okay, hey, let's look at this other thing that, and I think I share Stephanie's comments or concerns in here about the idea of us having to really clearly define those objectives. And I'm just nervous that we would be able to adequately do that each time. So
and giving the latitude to chase those other rabbits. I
that's
mean,
right.
because sometimes, you know, you can create an audit, I don't know, I won't say never ending, but an audit that goes beyond, you know, you're saying, hey, you know, we'd like to see you do 7, 8 audits a year. And then if you're going to go chase rabbits, you might cut those audits in half. You may be doing 3 or 4 audits a
Yeah,
year.
and I think you've got to be able to have some direction, some oversight to say, okay, so that's enough. We don't really need to get that deep into the weeds on that. Somebody's obviously got to be able to provide that guidance and oversight. And so with that, I do like the idea that maybe somebody with the expertise on staff does kind of oversee some of that and can provide that daily direction, because a group of 5 people who can only talk in a public meeting, I think it's hard for us to do that effectively.
Yeah. And if I can help this bring, because I know Mr. Mathias had a comment one time, I said that, but I used to see those rabbits running, and that's where my comment came from when I said I would have discussions with management about things I saw that I felt would be cost-effective, you know, to the organization if they would address those and help reduce costs. I didn't audit them, so I couldn't put them in the report, if that makes sense. But those were the rabbits. If I would have started chasing those rabbits, you know, the audit might be 3, 4, 5, 6 months long, because you're going off into other directions. So just to clear that up, it may not have been clear when I initially said it, but that was a good way to put it.
Mr. Brandenburg?
This is a fun one to try to keep up with the comments and get my thoughts in order. There's a lot of things we're discussing here. I would agree with a lot of Mr. Dodd's comments, Mr. Mathias's comments, Stephanie's comments. I think the main things that stick out is, while I too have a good relationship with my audit committee member, he's been vigilant for the last year. He's got some health issues why he wasn't able to make it today. But outside of him and Vance being here, I don't see the other 3, and I know this is a meeting during the day on a weekday, and it's not always easy to get those schedules. But I struggle sometimes with seeing the overall validity of having the committee in addition to us and in addition to everything else. Sometimes I think it could just slow down the process in a way where we still stay surface level from time to time. I don't have strong opinions on that, but I would lean towards considering either eliminating or changing the audit committee in its current function. I do think having an internal auditor is important for a lot of those reasons, but I also think that there's a lot of validity, specifically in our current state, in the thought of that person reporting to Mr. Ward with his audit experience, with his finance experience, with everything he's done prior to being here with us now. I want to be mindful of the future, but I've got 1,000% confidence in the superintendent and Mr. Ward to be able to lead that and give us some more guidance as to what to look for and what not to look for in our current situation. Down the road, when the superintendent and Mr. Ward move on, retire many, many, many years in the future, that can be readdressed then. But I think we've got a good thing going here, and we've got a lot of expertise, more so than what we have collectively, to where in our current unique situation, I think that's something to strongly consider. So I think as of now, where I stand is I would be in favor of looking at disbanding the audit committee, hiring an internal auditor. Of the 4, I know this is hard to ask you, Mr. Mock, I don't know if Mr. Ward, you know, or anybody else, but of the 4 candidates that originally shortlisted, did any of them, do we know, have relevant government school experience?
No.
They did not?
I think one of them had some city experience, City of Las Vegas, but the other 3 had no kind of experience.
Okay. Which then gives me a little more, I agree that the communication in the process has been difficult and challenging and sends the wrong message and doesn't always make us look in the best light. But at the same time, I think this is a very important decision to make. And if we don't feel that those candidates have what we need for this to operate effectively, then I think it's better in the long term and probably even the short term to reopen under whatever we do moving forward and look at it again. But I think, to sum it up, I would say I would be in favor of looking at ending the audit committee, hiring an internal auditor, finding the right candidate to do that with the experience, and would strongly consider reporting to Mr. Ward and then to us in workshops and everything else. That's kind of my thoughts.
Real quick, could I make a comment? I
Certainly.
mean, you brought up an idea. I was just thinking of Mr. Ward comment too, but could the board become the audit committee? You know, they meet they meet 4 to 5 times a year based on the reports coming out? Would that be, I mean, you would just call it the audit committee meeting, you know, I'm just throwing that out.
Yes, and they would essentially be doing the audit function. At
Yes.
that point, you probably wouldn't call them the audit committee, but you would be performing those functions, and yes, you can do that. It's a good bit of work, but that's something the board could do, sure.
I think that having a separate, not blended it in with our typical workshop, but having it designated
Yes.
as this is what that purpose is,
Yeah.
I think it has real value. It keeps us focused.
Yeah, they would be focused on, it just looked like the audit committee agenda, it's, you know, it's structured.
When you don't have 8 topics, you know, that
Yeah.
allows us to focus on that. I think some of the.
Yeah, there's only 2 or 3
the
topics usually on
disadvantage
there.
for us in the past have been, we've tried to combine all that with all the other topics we have on that workshop, and now by the time we get to this.
You're
we don't
pretty
give it the
tired
time of
when
day,
it's
right,
noon.
And we figure, well, somebody's already looked at this, so we're good.
Right.
Well, being fair, that, again, my relationship with Kurt Benny, and he has been, I think, 16 years or something. He said he may be looking forward to a break, but I've always gotten briefings directly right after the meeting.
Yeah.
And so I felt it could be something that was almost rubber stamped as it's coming through, that,
I think that you have been in a unique situation where you've been able to find somebody very early on in your tenure here as a board member. But I think that some of the others, and maybe I have encountered over times, these people are just not like a dime a dozen in Lake County, right? Particularly when you look at the list of criteria or qualifications that Vance had drafted at one point of who would make a qualified member. There's like nobody who wants to do that, or they wouldn't do it for free, you know. And so, you know, with that. But, you know, the other advantage of that, though, is that you do get a diversity of perspectives, that recognizing that not every audit is necessarily financial in nature. You know, as I think about us as an operation, where's our opportunity for operational audits? I mean, certainly.
well, I actually think that's where your strength was, is in operational.
And I think to that point, too, we've got the diversity on this board to be able to look at these things from different angles. If we were to go that separate audit meeting route, I think there'd be a lot of value in that, would let us be more involved in the process and really know what's going on so we can make those decisions effectively.
Anything else?
And that meeting, if we were considered the audit committee, then we would be allowed to do the Zoom meeting then, correct?
That's an interesting question. I would say no. I don't think it changes that. Yeah, I don't
It's much more valuable when you actually come in and look, when I can look at you and speak personally, you know, from person to person.
Okay.
I think, that's the value in the group of us that are assembled, is there is a lot of diversity, there's a lot of commonality, but there's a lot of diversity in the backgrounds. For me, this is a process where I view it, you know, it's hard to separate who you were because they say you're always whatever you were. So I look at it from the standpoint of having been an employee and a principal to board member, and sometimes, you know, that transition takes a minute. You know, I knew Vance Yoakum before I knew who Vance Yoakum was. I thought he was the physical ranger, because in my tenure as a principal, he was always at the bargaining meetings, and he would grab me outside to discuss, you know, how we were spending the money. So with that said, Vance, while you and I don't always agree, I would certainly like to thank you for your service and to tell you that it is appreciated. And I do believe that always you came with the intent of doing good for the taxpayers. And I think that's a goal that those of us who sit up here share with you, because we also understand the importance of us being financially responsible to the people who put us here. So with that said, my distinguished colleagues have all brought up really good points. I don't think any of them have said things that I don't agree with. But I do believe I am in favor of having the auditor, but internal auditor, but I'm also in favor of them reporting to the board. I concur with Mr. Dodd that we don't have a lot of employees that are our employees. And I believe that we have a oversight that requires us to take responsibility for some people. Now, I do believe that Mr. Ward and the superintendent and her staff they do a wonderful job. And I've had the opportunity to see quite a few superintendents and quite a few CFOs, and certainly I can say that without reservation. And I think if it was given to Mr. Ward, he would do it well. I would not be upset if that's the way the vote went. It's just not, I think, what I would support. And with that said, I think that pretty much sums up my feelings. I do want to tell you, Mr. Mock, I learned a lot in my time as vice chair when I was attached to the Internal Audit Committee. So there was a valuable lesson there. I don't know how you find a safe place for a board member to be a part of that. Maybe you can't. But that was a valuable learning experience for me. So my hat's off to you for that. My hat's off to you for the way you conducted the meetings and the way you, because you did have very diverse people on that committee, and you were able to, find a common ground and have some good community meetings that, turned out okay. So, anything else?
I will say this, that changing the structure, particularly based on the interpretation of not having a board member, Mr. Benny said that it lost some real continuity when the board member was removed, the liaison, and also when Mr. Ward was removed from those audit committee meetings, that he found that it really lost some continuity and direction. So
I support those comments.
It's funny how operating in the sunshine, being forced to do that, actually could make government less effective, right, in some ways.
The sunshine makes the government very less effective. But it has goods and bads, let's put it that way.
But I also want to ask, with your qualification, because there's other levels of auditor,
Sure.
and do we need your certification that apparently limited that pool? Or is there one that, what should we be looking?
That was my presentation 2 years ago, but,
Okay, well, I don't remember 2 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, yesterday's pretty hard.
but, yeah, it's what you wanted your auditor to do is, and I think even then I said, I would lean more towards the IT certified internal technology auditor, because I think we're all going that way, a lot more is pushed to the clouds, and the processes and procedures around all that, are more technical in nature and require that information technology type background. The Institute of Internal Auditors spends thousands of hours every year looking and upgrading those audit, guidance, I guess is the best way to put it. So, I don't know, that was kind of I'm kind of more old school. I came when the computer box was probably as big as it has. It was that big, though, just one box, and it probably didn't work as good as a laptop. So, I'm kind of old school, and, I didn't really embrace IT soon enough, and probably should have a lot sooner in my career. But it's not an issue at this point.
Who wrote the request for proposal? Who wrote it? The request for a proposal for these auditors?
For the
How do we
external?
get the,
For the external?
no, internal.
What,
The resumes y'all were talking about, that you can see.
Oh,
the job posting
The job
was
postings.
developed with the guidance of the audit committee. And we kind of took the old one and then just kind of looked at it and updated it, basically.
Kirk was the chairman at the time, and they had those meetings. And so, for instance, there's nothing in the job specification that tells them that it's a one-man position. And I think that should be disclosed. But I think it's a good idea, the IT, get a CISA, Certified Information Systems Auditor. I was one for many years, but that may be a very good valid point, an alternative.
But I would say if we're already getting that from the AG and we're getting that from Purvis Gray annually, I don't know that that would be a focus that you need to add to.
Yeah, that,
No,
To me, the operational is the part that the other auditors aren't getting as well.
But the conundrum is that was Tom's strength, was operational. And it was a tremendous learning curve. I was talking about that a number of times.
Yes.
For him to get up to speed.
For government,
For
yeah.
government. And so I don't know what this even looks like, this position. But it seems like we need to define, if we're going to stay with an internal auditor, we ought to really have what our expectation is, particularly if they're now going to be answering to us, and they need to be able to speak in very simple terms, as long as I'm on the board.
So if I'm thinking about next steps, I know we've got like a lot of components of this. We've got the committee, we've got the auditor itself, and then, well, I think we've probably all landed on still having an internal auditor, but then what are the qualifications for that auditor? Which of these do we want to pick? So I'm going to guess we're not deciding all that today, but really, I guess the first step is it the committee? Is that our first step?
And that would require a change in school board policy.
And that's of course going to be at least a 28-day process. So I guess maybe I'm interested in seeing a draft policy come back before the board that what that would look like. Because I know we can't take a vote today, right? But I guess if there's something in front of us that we can look at it and potentially take action on.
Within the policy, we have to change it because the school board couldn't be the members.
I think the policy probably says that we're appointing somebody.
The policy is very specific on who's a part of it. So right now, it has no board member as a committee member, so you'd still have to adopt the policy. But I've got a policy from a neighboring county that doesn't have an internal audit committee. It's the one that fits the state requirement for the external auditor that we can send out today. And then if you guys can kind of look at what we currently have and what, you kind of have two extremes and you can come up with what you
Since
want.
we're paying Neola, do they have a policy?
Yeah, the one that I pulled is a Neola policy. Yeah.
And so then I'm going to guess our next step then is it's going to probably require some more board discussion to figure out, okay, who does this internal auditor report to and from which category do we want to pick this person?
We can get the current job description, and we can get the job description as advertised and get it to each individual board member, and we'll be happy to take your input, and then I can craft something together and send it out. For whatever reason, I think part of the negative side or the dysfunction of having the committee and the board is Tom kind of has 10 people giving him directions, and sometimes things they get confused and not carried out fully. But I know, and when they did the advertisement for the current ones that we have, they did not do the Florida School Finance Officers Association. So there's a whole group of auditors and accountants across the whole entire state of Florida that is specific to school boards that wasn't even notified.
And do those people tend to have the operational experience as well?
Yeah, they're typically they're made up of people like me and various departments and levels, and so they do have more of an operational.
Because one of the things I valued from an internal perspective is when superintendent or you can say, hey, here's an area of our operation that could use a closer look at, I could really use a hand, somebody to go process this and look at this for me. That might be in a variety of different areas. It could be in food service or transportation, or maybe if somebody's got an educational background in curriculum, or, you name it. There's so many components of our district that are well beyond the financial side. And so I would value this person having that kind of expertise where, say, I want you to go look at this and report back,
And I think there was confusion at times with Tom because he has 5 bosses.
Right.
Sit here and then him deflecting by saying we need to all have consensus. I think within the structure, if we're going to redo this, I think that currently it was the vice chair that was assigned, but that it can be vice chair or chair. But if we had something, it would be fed through the chair. So it's one person. I think if you have one person you're answering to, then that might be a whole lot easier than 5 different board members going to an auditor.
Well, just to go off of that, one of the things I found out early when I started here was if I went off of what one person said, it might make someone else upset. And they said you didn't have the majority of the boards for that direction. So you have to clarify that too, is does that one person have the authority, and do the other 4 wish to give that one person the authority?
I think we could probably create a structure in which, even though the person might be reporting to the board or reporting to the CFO or whatever that is, if it's to the board, we can still designate somebody with some responsibilities to provide a little, timely direction when necessary. Like there was the one time you got a hotline call and you said, I was vice chair at the time, you're like, okay, what do I do? How far do you want me to chase this?
Because we didn't have a process.
Because we didn't have, the 5 members of the board are not going to, and by nature of, because this is an anonymous tip into a hotline, you probably don't want to discuss that immediately in the public eye before you have a chance to investigate, right? And so that's where it's helpful to have a point person who
was
can give
extremely
that.
helpful.
That's right. And so,
Yeah.
so I think we could develop a
I found the
process.
board liaison extremely helpful, to be able to call one person and not have to always try to call 5 people real quick on something, so at least to bounce it off of, and
Right.
then, and then see if I had to go
Yeah.
deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I found it, yeah, I wasn't happy when they took the liaison off the audit committee, so just.
I think one of the other questions before the board, because you called me about this, and I think you may have spoken to the other board members, the process by which the internal auditor is hired, even down to who makes up the interviewing committee, we don't really have anything in place to say. We don't know if a board member or if all board members are part of it, or, for example, the question about whether or not Mr. Mock himself would be a part of that committee. I think that's also something that the board is going to have to come up with an answer for.
100%. We had a very detailed process when we hired our superintendent of here were all the different groups we wanted to put to the candidates in front of, and here was, our chance for one-on-one interviews, or chances board interviews, here's the public setting. And so I think it would be prudent for us to designate what that process is. Maybe it's not quite as elaborate as the superintendent's, but something. And so I'd love that conversation. Very good
Yeah.
point, thanks.
Mr. Ward, I guess if you could please share with everyone, because I'm sure Mrs. Luke would also like to have some more input, those possible policies from Neola, and I'm assuming that's the same one as the surrounding county, or is that a different one? Are there two
It's the
or
same
one?
one.
The
It's the
same
same
one.
one.
If we could possibly have an opportunity to look at those.
And y'all want the job descriptions that we currently
I
have?
think that would be very helpful.
And to tell you the truth, I'd really like for Tom to look at it.
Okay.
See, and I'd like for the current audit committee to look at it and really dig into,
Yeah.
because there's value in having those opinions before we go out with a
Well,
request. And then this request for proposal, though.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, so the audit committee is the one who developed the job description that we currently
What I
have?
heard Van say is they just took an old one and
Well, they,
They developed a lot of the points on it, and then Kurt had some site meetings, I believe, but there are things in there that I don't remember.
And then you guys just posted it online? That was it?
No, it came before the.
There was
board.
discussion.
You, and then you guys
How
approved.
did- How
Okay.
did you get resume? Where did people find it?
we did a job posting.
We did a job
did
Just the
posting.
job post?
Yeah.
Couple,
Is there
couple
a-
different places, but, yeah.
Indeed, IIA, well,
I used the IIA job posting website. They used Indeed.
Yeah.
I believe HR uses Indeed. I used my LinkedIn page because I have about 1,600 followers, and those followers shared it. I think it went over 4,000 views. So just,
And then what did you suggest? Another group?
FSFOA, Florida School Finance
Yeah.
Officers Association.
that would,
And that
did it go
would-
there or not?
No, it did
Oh,
not.
it didn't? Okay.
I'm surprised it didn't.
And then it was managed, the process by,
HR.
Tom and
HR?
HR, yeah.
Pretty much HR, but I was constantly calling them, making sure what we were doing with stuff and making sure the audit committee was getting informed / hiring committee. Good?
Anyone else got any further directions that you want to see?
The only other thing I would say, it seems like there's a consensus of most of the others to report to the board, and I've got no issues with that. So if that's something else that we've got a consensus on that could be clear, I mean, Mr. Ward will obviously still be involved, and his expertise will be available in the board discussions or whatever else we do moving forward. But that could be another piece of this equation that could be cleared up.
Yeah, I want to give that one a lot more thought. I don't know where I am on that
Okay.
yet. So-
but, and I got to tell you the truth, the answer for me is that we're all collaborative and we're a team here.
Sure.
But let's make no mistake that the internal auditor answers to the board, period, end of story. And so any of that side stuff working with Mr. Ward is appreciated and the superintendent is appreciated, but ultimately by statute, he answers to us.
Sure. Well, then they'll still be involved in the workshops and can ask those questions there.
No. I would expect, as we've done, I think all of your audits, you've run them by Mr. Ward for comment, right? Or the superintendent?
Well,
Depends
he
on what
sees them in the
department.
audit committee, but
It depends on the department. If it's something financial, then he usually runs them by me, but if it's something like in Mr. Carr's position, he'll run them by John.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
never
yeah,
want to
that's-
set us up where it's adversarial. I'm just saying it should be collaborative, and that if you find something that's really bad, that you ought to be able to give district staff the opportunity before you run to the board with it. That's kind of my point with that.
sure,
So,
sure. And like Mr. Ward said, I've always met with either Mr. Carr or Mr. Ward. You know, if it's in that area, I've always met with those individuals.
and I think that gives them an opportunity to respond
Absolutely.
and for you to also clarify, right?
Correct.
So that's healthy to me. So that part's healthy. But at the end of the day, I don't want anyone thinking that we're moving the internal auditor under finance or under district staff, because it's just not what the statute allows.
Does it? I thought it does allow that, though. Or it's designee?
It allows designee, yeah. The board says designee. The statute does.
The designees are going to be the person who audited.
Okay. And board members, how do you want to handle deciding on the criteria for the committee that will actually select? Do you want to wait until you've decided exactly how you're moving forward? But we need a plan.
We do need a plan.
If we're going to vote, we're going to vote on this, right, at the next meeting?
Is it at the
some
next
point.
meeting? But at some point, yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Because so far, the only person that has shown up and spoken to this has been Vance.
Right.
I think how do we respectfully address those?
Without
committee
hearing
members?
from
I
them.
think that's what the policy gives us in the 28-day window, having opportunities for those folks
Makes sense.
to
Okay,
come
I
up
agree with
and.
that. I agree with that. Well, we're doing a policy like we've already decided. Well, I guess we have decided, though.
To move forward with drafting it short.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Mr. Yocum would like to say something.
Just that I provided all this information to the committee members, and I did suggest that they contact their appointing committee member. So I don't know whether that happened or not,
It
but
happened in my case. I got all
Yeah,
the
they did. I think everyone did.
And your committee member, your appointees were okay with moving this direction?
Yes. Yes.
But, I think, okay, even if the committee doesn't exist anymore, there's nothing that precludes a board member from saying, this is not my wheelhouse, this is not my expertise, I don't know what this means. And I go to a trusted advisor who says, hey, let me sit down with you and talk about this. The first few times we were talking about building stuff, I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm going to go seek some guidance from somebody who knows about that, right? So I think the same thing with your audits, you can.
There's still public meetings.
public meetings.
The audit committee members can still come and be a part of that process, absolutely, and I'd welcome that. I just think it would simplify chains of command if they just reported to us.
No question about that part.
Okay. Any final thoughts on this topic? Are we all good? Yes, sir.
maybe just help clarify. One is what direction for the audit committee, should it be involved in anything anymore? Or secondly is it sounds like you're going to get the job descriptions and come up with some information from finance and proceed with restarting the process and maybe going out to the group he mentioned to find somebody that maybe has more of an education background. But I think it would be helpful if I didn't quite understand what is going to happen next.
I think that's because we haven't quite decided
Okay.
what's going to happen next.
All right, so
But
I'm just
what I would
verifying
say
that.
is that you're the chairman now, so I would say that
For now.
for today, the committee exists. So once we have some direction, that we'll communicate that to you, You're
Okay.
Mr. Dodd's person. So I'm sure Mr. Dodd will be in touch, and we'll let you know, because it sounds like the committee is maybe going to be involved in the selection process, so.
So we
Possibly.
as a board, when are we going to talk about what that process, define that process? Will that be at our next meeting when we look at this proposal for what the committee structure would look like?
I think that needs to happen.
Yeah, okay. Because certainly timeliness is going to be of
Yeah.
importance for us to
Yeah.
seek out qualified candidates. And, 'cause, I mean, when you talk about how many people you sent this out to, And we got this many people who wrote back.
But I think we missed an important group.
Qualified. You know, I don't think we're jumping out of our chairs about about that situation.
I think we missed an important group with the financial
Yeah, right,
officers,
right.
though. I think those people, we definitely need to tap into that.
Well, and I think too, the audit committee is still going to exist until the policy potentially is approved, correct? So the audit committee is still here for at least the next 28 days or whenever that is.
We don't have anything scheduled, except we were going to have those interviews. So then the question is, are we stopping the interviews? Okay, so we're not going to plan on that. So really, we don't have anything to do until, I think we have a meeting the end of March, April 30th, so.
We want to make sure we let those people know that, did we tell people they had an interview time? Did we schedule
No,
it
I
with the
think,
person?
That was canceled.
that was canceled. I talked to HR before they notified them, because I was writing a letter to send them to explain, what it was, and then just came to conclusion this discussion needed to take place. So they weren't notified, except HR said they'd follow up with them and, go from there.
I think
So-
that's important. We don't want the people to think. that
Yeah,
we-
no, I didn't want them hanging either, and they had not even been notified they were one of the top four or not. So I think that's moot, so we'll go from there. And the April 30th meeting probably is important for the committee because his intern has a report that she's going to present to us. And so if nothing else, I think that would be great for her, or she could come here and give a report. Thanks.
I do have one clarification question about the applicants. Did they receive any kind of communication saying that you just didn't
Not from
apply in
us,
vain?
everything's through HR, and HR, I don't believe it talked to him.
My understanding is that HR never did communicate anything
Okay, so
because they're in holding on the board decision.
so pretty much
Okay.
their resumes came to us, and they have not received any feedback on them.
Just out of respect, it seems like we
Yeah.
ought to notify them that there's a change in direction and we'll reconsider.
Yeah. I wouldn't want them to just think we
Yeah.
ignored their interest.
Okay,
We'll do that.
he'll do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Can I just summarize our direction? Two separate issues. First of all, in regards to the audit committee, we're going to bring back some policy options for you that will include the makeup, if we continue with that function, or whether or not that's eliminated. We're also going to notify the current candidates that applied for the internal audit position, and we're going to bring back to you the job descriptions, as well as in a future workshop, establish the expectations and the audit selection process, as well as that job description. Is that an accurate summarization of where we are with that process?
Well done.
And of course, Mr. Cole's taking a lot of notes as well, because we will have to think about any of those policy revisions in regards to the sunshine that was addressed previously, because that doesn't go away. So he's got some comments and notes on that as well.
And I think too, just to throw one more thing out, because the chair did ask about committee makeup, and I think my kind of knee-jerk reaction would be the five of us, Mr. Mock and Mr. Ward, and then anybody else if we see fit. I
Hard
think
time getting Mr. Mock to come to a meeting.
I think they've got the expertise on both ends of the spectrum, and would know there, and if we are
He's gonna be
considering
the
moving forward. Okay, well, if he's available, and would have interest, or if not, throw it out there as the option. But we've got our expertise, they've got their expertise. I think that they're both warranted at the table, as we consider this next position.
Just a suggestion is that the Orlando School District has a audit committee. I think I sent you a link to them at one time. And theirs is like 3 members of the board, and I think the CFO and somebody else. Well, that's the audit committee. No, they have an external audit committee that's, well, you ought to look at it, but one of the options is maybe 2 or 3 of you, and then maybe the CFO and 1 or 2 other people that you select. It could be from administration or something, and that's an alternative.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody need a break?
I am really confused. So I thought we just said it was going to be the board, that it was going to be the committee. And now
Selection committee.
Now the selection.
Selection committee.
Well, but that is a question to be decided. Is the board going to be, or some fraction of the board going to be the audit committee? That was one of the questions that was asked.
Well, the entire board interviewed, and voted on our superintendent, who's our other employee. I am of the opinion that the board would be heavily engaged in this decision. That's right. So
Okay.
if we're doing a pre-screening, I don't see it going to the extent that you were talking about.
Right.
But I think that there could be a pre-screening by you, Scott, and Nick, you're going to have to work with them. Whoever's going to touch this person should maybe be involved in looking at who's the best candidate.
You got that?
Got it.
Okay. She's got it.
Cool. Okay.
We do have another item, so we can go right into that, or we can have a break, whichever you prefer.
Let's go.
All right, let's go. I believe, Mr. Ward, that is you as well?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to let Mr. Zachary speak to most of it, but I'm here for other additional input, too. Bring it up now.
Oh. Good morning. I hope it's not that complicated today. So, today we're going to walk you through the professional services procurement process. That's how we go about selecting our architects and construction managers. And then talk about proposed changes to 3 different policies that we have. One of them is the procurement of commodities and contractual services. The other one deals with federal grants and funding, how we deal with the procurement. And then the third one is local purchasing. So for the procurement of our consultants, which is the architects and construction managers, we follow the Florida Statute 287.055. It's essentially a qualification-based process. It applies to construction projects that exceed $4 million, because anything up to $4 million goes through continuing contracts. It's essentially a 2-step qualification process. The first one, we shortlist the top 3 up to 5 vendors. And then the second step is they come before you now and do the presentations, those shortlisted. All vendors access the bid package through VendorLink, and all submittals, all communication, also through VendorLink. We post everything there, the results. And add a step, once we do the shortlist, we send the results through email to those vendors who submitted proposals. So they get that in an email too.
And just to jump in real quick, as you guys are aware, board members are aware, the district reached out and contracted with some consultants to come in and help us refine some of our process and review a lot of what we do in the procurement to help our public have a better opportunity to engage in this process. And one of the things that they suggested was that we use something such as VendorLink, and that was their major recommendation. I don't think they realized at the time that we were already actively engaged with VendorLink and using it. But some of there are some other venues that do the same thing as VendorLink does, but a lot of them are just, VendorLink's the largest one, and a lot of them are just the entities on VendorLink and pays additional funding to put it on the other platform too, so just multiple platform type thing. But we don't really see a lot of return in increasing that platform, and following their recommendation, we would stay with VendorLink on that using that platform. The other thing that I would point out, subsequent to Ollie putting this together, we became aware that both House and Senate have passed some changes to 287.055, and where it says it applies to construction projects exceeding $4 million, I believe that's now moved up to a higher number, like I think
7
million.
Or 7 million.
So if that is signed by the governor, we would suggest that we would bring back a policy revision to move that up to $7 million.
Could I ask a qualifying question?
Sure.
This actually is going to be from Mr. Cole. That it has always been my understanding that particularly when we shortlist and we're going to select this is for construction management, that if you go to number one, and number one give you a proposal, and you want to go to number two, and number two's proposal actually is higher than number one, you can't go back to number one.
Well, the idea is that the process fails with number one, and then you go down to number two. So I've never seen you go back to number one.
Because I understood we couldn't.
Yeah, well, it
And
wouldn't.
that's always a fear of going to the next person. You know what I mean?
Right, right. The statute says that if you're unable to reach agreement with number one, then you go to number two. It doesn't actually address what happens if, well, it actually says you can go to number three if you don't, not successful.
But can we go back to number one?
Yeah, so like your question is, because price is not a component of the presentation,
No.
right?
And that's the problem.
So we pick this guy, and then you go negotiate, and he says, it's gonna be $10 million. We go, $10 million? We thought that was gonna cost 7. So then we go to number 2, and he says, well, actually, it's gonna cost $12 million. And we go, okay, well, the 10 maybe wasn't so bad, right?
Yeah.
We don't have a way to go back and get that 10 million.
So
First
it
guy.
doesn't, the statute, and Ollie, correct me if you've seen it differently, but I don't see the statute addressing that situation.
Doesn't.
It doesn't say you can't do that.
I always thought that we couldn't. So if,
Well, I mean, it's a competitive negotiation too, so you negotiate with the most qualified, right? And the only time that, when you negotiate is just pricing at this point, because we've already hammered all the legal language, so it's a pricing.
well, we looked at the prettiest nickel, and we picked 2 of them. And so, but to go to number, I always understood, if, once we drop number, like if you're going to be a construction manager, and let's say you go, I want 8% for overhead,
Yeah.
or profit, I'm sorry, profit. And we go, no, we're not going with you. Now, the market's totally changed because we're used to 4, but you go to number 2, and he goes, I want 12%.
Yeah, I think,
Then you want to go back to number 1.
Yep.
Then I'm hearing that we could do that.
Well, I don't see anything that says you can't, so unless, there's nothing in the statute says you can't, so my initial opinion would be, yes, you can do it. I would want to just check and see if there's been any AG opinions on that.
That's what, like, because, and also then, if number 1 now knows that it's 12 and he was at 8, he may come back and go, I want 10. How far does that negotiation go?
Yeah.
And I don't know that we've ever gone from, that we've ever left number 1.
Yeah, there's always a risk. We're like, okay, what if we go to number 2 and they come in higher, you know? Now we've lost this, you know?
Right. Well, I thought we just absolutely couldn't go back.
Yeah.
I don't see anything that specifically says you can't. I'll come back with a definitive on that.
I'm going through it right now, I just happen to have it pulled up, just in case.
Carry it around in your pocket.
Yes.
You're like a mind reader.
I had it pulled up because I always refer to it, just in case. Second most qualified, failing accord with the second, must terminate negotiations if we fail with the second. We must terminate, the agency shall then undertake negotiation with the third most qualified firm. So you go
What
to the
does
third.
terminate mean? Like terminate and you can't go back?
Yeah,
Or-
no, so you go from 1 to 2 to
Right.
3.
But then if, once we terminate with 1, to Mr. Mathias's point, we fail with 2.
Or 3.
Oh, after that, you can select additional firms in order to of their competitiveness.
But not.
But it just still doesn't say you can go back. See, it
It
just
doesn't
go
say.
back.
It doesn't
It doesn't
say.
say, yeah.
So it just goes in succession.
You have to
No,
get
no, no,
through
but-
everybody
But we
and
want
then
to,
start
what I'm
over.
really asking straightforward is, can I go back?
It doesn't say that you can't go back.
But it's.
It goes
It
1,
says-
2,
yeah.
3, and
It says
then,
shall, so if you're,
But then
if
it
you
says
end 1,
select additional.
yeah, so if you end 1, it says shall 2. If you end 2, it says shall 3. And then if you end 3, it says look at additional.
yep.
Okay.
But you always have the opportunity to reject all and
Yeah,
start
it's
over.
true, shall.
I'm not trying to reject everybody.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
trying to be able to work my way back.
No,
If
it's
you go backwards, you might have to reject them all.
yes, you may have to,
You have to
reject-
reject. then
Yeah.
go back again.
well, it's all shall, and to Scott's point is that shall select.
Yeah.
Shall, the word shall is the binding one,
Right.
so from a legal perspective. So you go next.
So the shall makes us go to number 2, then.
It does, that's the way it reads, but it doesn't say if failing that, you can't go back. It just does, I don't think it contemplated that, to be honest with you. Just, I've never seen that where it's typically, you're done, right? You've done everything you can with number 1, and it fails, and you go to number 2. I've never seen it go back. it could become a real circular process when you're going back now, terminating, going to number 2, terminating, going to number 1.
But it also, because we're not dealing with any numbers whatsoever when we're selecting the top 3, that you may or may not know then what number 2 and number 3
That's
are
true.
going to be.
That's true.
So I'd want the ability to go back to number 1, who was
That goes to
by
us
design to
understanding
this.
what the
Right.
cost is.
So let me go back and see if there's been anything interpreting that provision to see if it allows that.
Thanks.
And if so, we'll do
That's
that.
all.
Yeah.
Nobody asked you to come up here.
I know, but I thought I would as a friend of the court. Going back a number of years,
You want to speak to which topic?
CCNA.
Okay.
This process, going back when I first started doing this, both coming here to meetings as well as the county, I spent a lot of time investigating CCNA because I used to audit contracts in California. We didn't have this. When you had a contract, you would start out with getting a bid, and then you would look at the bids with dollar amounts, and then you'd pick one. But this whole process eliminates you knowing what the cost is. They don't have to tell you. And so as a consequence, you can have, the winner is usually the company that's the biggest, that has the best marketing and presentation department, because they come in and they give you a dazzling presentation. And so it says it's a process that evaluates and selects vendors based on qualifications and performance, not about price. And so that's to keep in mind, is that there's a lot of criticism, there are a lot of articles out there in the state. I did talk to one contractor, though, and he said that really that's better than what happens is if they bid on price, then they hit you with change orders after the fact. And that, so it's kind of like one or the other. But I thought I'd just bring that up because it wasn't really discussed here.
Thank you. Could we have your card, please? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Moving.
So the shortlist process, before I gave you a handout. It has 2 exhibits, Exhibit A and Exhibit B. One of them is for the selection of the architects, the first phase, and then the other one, construction manager. They still follow the same criteria here. This is out of the statute too. However, this gives you the detail of what we ask of them when they submit the proposals, so that we could compare the proposal that was sent. The evaluation committee has. So past performance history, assigned personnel qualifications, current and projected workload, willingness to meet time and budget requirements, whether the vendor is a certified minority, and distance from their office to here, to our district office, and then their financial capabilities.
What's the committee look like? Because at one time, we had industry competent people that sat in. And if y'all changed who the members are?
So we have members from facilities and growth planning, and then we have at-large, one member from at-large from the community. So we like to get people from the community that we are doing the project in, like Lady Lake, for example. The last one, we had somebody from there. And then the school principal, too, is involved.
So we've lost the having an industry expert.
So if you look at the qualification, really, there's no per se technical engineering aspects to the evaluation, because that's not what we're after. So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to look at the proposals to see whether this organization is really qualified to do the job. It's just comparative. So there's no technical engineering aspects to any of our bids, because that's not what they're asking.
They're not asking it, but you're asking the people to evaluate the presentation.
Yep.
And this goes to my concern that then we're picking the shiniest penny rather than the person that's the most competent. And
Well, what we ran across in the past, because when I first got here, we had some of those that did include the industry area. Yeah, so either one, they'd rather engage in the bidding process, so that if they can, they can't sit on the committee too, because that would be a conflict of interest. And then, two, they do try to find someone that's somewhat engaged in the process. Like, I know when they did Mineola, they used somebody from the city that was in the planning department that looked at buildings and schematics and stuff like that and had an idea of some of the local people. So they are trying to find somebody that's in the community that does have something to do with the industry. It's just not as specific as hiring an engineer, or not hiring, but having an engineer on or having an architect on the actual committee, because it's just difficult to find to volunteer.
That was the problem. I think it was difficult to staff it up with volunteers, just the same thing.
So, you know, to kind of answer also your question, if you look at what we're asking them in the experience, we look for what type of school projects you have, the value, the square footage, to compare to ours, to the specific project, the years of experience, the staff. When we look at this stuff, we ask the same thing: how long they've been doing this, whether they're licensed. So there is nothing about at this stage is nothing about give us schematics, give us this, because that then will entail having somebody who's an expert in looking at that. But here, we're just straightforward looking at their expertise, whether they can actually do the job or not. And same thing, current projected workload, to see if they're actually going to be able to have the staff dedicated to this project. So there's no technical aspect to that either, so.
This is for CMs.
This is overall for CMs and architects, and it goes here in depth. The CMs, for the CMs, we added criteria within their experience, and we asked them to actually give us a 3-page summary of their last project, talk about specifics in there, just to give us an idea of who that vendor is. We asked him to talk about the project's timeline and methodology, what quality control, cost control, and value engineering things that they put in that last project, any obstacles they face, and how do they overcome them, just to understand their problem-solving issues. And then local labor participation for the project, to see if they actually go out there and hire local vendors to be part of the project. So we take a look at that too, for the construction managers. And then the presentation criteria for the architects, we ask them to present their knowledge of the site and local conditions, local area, and knowledge of their local area demographics, talk about their overall approach to the project, and what type of cost control and value engineering they're adding to that. And again, we don't see it as that technical either, that you won't be able to pick the best possible vendor to do the project.
Well, I think our presentations from architects have been pretty detailed. Quite the opposite. I think that.
The design.
The design was what
Yeah.
we were looking for. We decided who we were going to go with. So I think it's a little more detailed than just.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I
at
don't
the,
even know how you could shortlist unless you had a detail from each one. I don't see how you could just answer 15 questions and shortlist. I don't know, that's weird. It's all just odd to me. But go ahead.
And then here is for the construction managers, their overall approach, their construction materials costs, talk about that, and then also their project coordination and safety, plus their knowledge of the site and proposed. So these are the criteria that you have seen when they come and discuss their projects. Any questions?
Ollie, one brief one, to Bill's last comment, which I think is a good one. How does what is the initial packet submitted? Does it consist of this information
Yep.
to get shortlisted?
Yep.
So this is the information they
Yes,
provide?
exactly.
Shortlist based
Yes.
off of this?
That's one, Exhibit A is for what we typically do for the architects, and Exhibit B is,
for the
yeah.
contract.
And we give them kind of like what we're looking for, schedule of work that we're looking for, and then we ask them to provide us all this
Okay.
in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through and I'm trying to figure out too, what else we'd like to see in here. Because I mean,
And we keep refining this, actually.
Sure.
We use the category that is in the statute,
Yeah.
but we keep refining, like an issue that came up, how can you hold them accountable to the willingness to meet time and budget? It's not just a simple, okay, yes, we're going to meet that time and budget. So I have to look at, okay, what can I do now to add, heft to it?
Yeah.
So we're going to include language in there to perhaps give us your schedule.
yeah.
Let's take a look at your schedule, how you're going to pursue or something.
Well, and I'm just thinking too,
Yeah.
on the shortlist process, I mean, I respond to RFPs quite often in my business side of things, and I think this information is appropriate, and I think what we're looking for here is to have it as succinct as possible and not have the 300 pages of fluff,
Yep.
as much as what are your last 5 jobs, what are the specs of them, so we can truly compare
Yep.
experience and qualifications more so than just who has a shiny marketing department, because that certainly does
Yeah.
factor into these things. But I don't know what else we would really add here. I mean, I'd give it more thought and keep looking through, but I think this information is appropriate to at least get the shortlist side of it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll keep looking at it. We're, in fact, meeting sometime in April with growth planning and facilities to even look at this and how we can even improve it further. So, and we meet, by the way, with the vendors.
Sure.
Get their input, and we ask questions, and they provide their input. And I've been getting comments from the vendors when they see our RFQs, how happy they are, and it's clear to them now, and it's much easier for them to put proposals for us. So at least I get that feedback from
What
them.
have you done and why should we select you? I think that's what this does. So,
We completely abandoned the design build as an option.
No.
I don't think it's completely abandoned it. I think because we keep using the same K-8 prototype, there's not as much design, it's just adapt and build. They have to,
Fruitland Park was
well, Fruitland Park was different, but that's facility's probably going to have.
we never did a
some-
postmortem on how it worked or didn't work. And part of it not working is you typically, remember they came in with a team, it was a team approach. Then you build to a budget. You design and build to a budget. In my world, that's done every day. It makes a lot of sense. But the way we got out of whack was they came in and presented, but then we ended up still approving the architect, contractor, separate contractors. And the whole idea is to have them on the team at the same time so that they're coordinating. I still think it's a model worth looking for, rather than architect and then construction manager as two separate. The downside, I thought, was that you do have a package then. So you may like this contractor better, but he's linked up with the architect. Well, that's kind of shame on him, right? He's not the guy we wanted. Anyway.
And we do ask the CMs and the architects, and we actually put it in the RFQ that they'll have to work together to put, on the design and all aspects of the project. So that's
That
part
also
of it.
requires us to select them both at the same time, which
It-
has
it-
not always been the case.
It's true, but one right after the other, we do it. We try to do it one right. We select the architect and then turn around and select the construction manager. So,
Can we say that we want to do that rather than trying, it should be the way it's done? Can we say that
That-
to you?
that they work.
No. We're going to pick an architect and we're going to pick a CM in the same window of time, so they're
Oh.
immediately working.
We can.
There's a lot of value. That would be the same as design build almost then, right?
So you're saying run,
Two RFQs.
run the RFQs at the same time, so you can pick both of them at the same time, and they can
And
work
they
together.
begin immediately working together.
Oh, Yeah, I have to look at the statute if we're allowed to do that.
We'll definitely look into it.
Yeah, we'll definitely look into that.
We've had some conversations about trying to try to streamline the process anyway, because there seems to be a time of, here's the architect, they're already building, they're already doing something, and then,
Yeah.
3 or 4 months later, here's the
I-
construction manager, and, yeah, we understand, so.
I've done that approach in California when I did an outpatient surgical center, and that we hired an architect, and we put out an RFP, and that they can put together one package, an architect and a construction manager, put together one package and submit it as a.
Well, that was the design bill we did for
Yeah.
the KA, the original prototype.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And then we just instantly moved away, and I understand, because we already had
Yep.
a prototype. We didn't need the architect as much.
Yep.
But even if we're not going to do design build, which is what the model you just described, is
Yep.
exactly what I'm talking about. If we're not going to do that, then at least have those two entities
Yeah.
hired within a short timeline, because what happens is the architect designs to whatever they're thinking about. The CM comes in, and he can't meet the budget. Then you're redesigning, which means you're paying for that time. It's a lot more seamless and a lot more efficient if they're both working together. I want to bring in this sidewalk with this material, boom, you pick them. What's it cost? That's the CM role.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I'd agree. I think there's a lot of value in that. And I would say, too, instead of having them do one joint proposal, so where Schenkel is going to be tied to whoever and Ziskovic is going to be tied to whoever, pick one, pick the other, back to back, but then they all work enough together already that won't be an issue.
I saw the downside of the design build when they teamed up.
Right.
Because you're right. You
Yeah,
ended up-
pick them both
Actually,
independently
yeah,
but
pretty good.
simultaneously. Yeah.
But pick them simultaneously.
Yeah.
Good to go. And
No,
they're all
I
going to
agree.
work together, because we've seen that in the presentations. All the engineers and all the.
Yeah.
the
Leah from Attorneys
professionals
and
are all the same.
everything.
They're all the same. They just go float in.
The only purpose I see in doing it the way that we are doing it is if you don't have it fully funded yet, but you can go ahead and start the design, you can start the design so that when you do get the funding, you can go ahead and kick off the construction.
Couldn't you
But
have a provision for the CM to come on board?
early.
Early.
That's what we'd have to look at, but I think you could. Because you still have to come back and approve the GMP.
That's right.
So that's, technically, you're not really supposed to be spending money on true building until
Right.
that point. So if you engage the CM, there shouldn't be a lot of expenditures until you do the GMP.
I think it's a good point.
So, yeah, we can look at that.
Do you have any questions about the process itself?
Nope.
So everybody's favorite subject, tie bids. So we worked with VendorLink. We actually saw the first results yesterday when we did the short list for the villages for the construction manager, is that we added a ranking aspect. So they take the score and automatically does the ranking. So cumulative ranking. So the lowest score is the number one in terms of the ranking, based on their cumulative total score. But what I think I'm going to refine that to where I want him actually to do a separate phase. It does the scoring, and then the second phase, it migrates all the numbers and does the ranking, because it was so confusing when you had them side by side. But what we're doing is now scoring and then ranking them in the short list, and then the lowest ranking score is number one, and so on. And that's how we shortlist the vendors.
Ollie, if I can make one comment
Yes.
right there. One thing that I've seen in the past, and I haven't seen the scoring on the last couple, and I think the ones we've gotten in the presentations have been great. But I know on a previous one, maybe 2 or 3 ago, it seemed like we had a big cluster at like something like 88.7, because the criteria was so similar and they all have the qualifications. And then the only thing that really split them was the minority points.
Yes.
So then we were getting it that way. Is there a way for us to really either streamline the shortlist criteria more, or at least the points given to it, to try to create a little more separation? Then you're probably getting to that, but
So that's part of my discussion yesterday when I was talking to Kelly. I said, look, I think what we need to do is define the scoring more. So we can say, we allocate, let's say, 40 points for experience. We can say if a vendor meets the minimum required experience for that criteria, well, let's say we start them at 60% of that score. And then a degree of separation. If you have more, then you get 70 or 80, and so on. So maybe work on that, refining that, and hopefully we'll have a better result. So I don't know. I mean, I can, it's on my mind, because right now it's like, okay, 80.2 and
they all were like
80.3.
88.7,
So
like
who
three
do
of
you?
them the same exact
But
score.
are we trying to go, I mean, if we're looking for experience, is it going to be the old same players every time, and we don't give that youthful new company the opportunity?
No, because I think we've got different ones. in the
And we
list.
have different ones too this time.
Yeah.
We've been getting new ones now.
Now, I understand what he's saying.
I
He's
know,
saying,
I know.
if you're saying
If
20
we just value
years,
expertise, then we're going to get the
20
same
years,
four that
yeah.
done for 50 years.
so how do we not let that happen?
Yeah.
Or do we want it to happen? I mean, I personally don't. but-
Well, I think that's where the minority share, or if there's
Yeah.
other way that you can get it in there. If a under 5-year contractor with X experience gets 2 points or something, I don't know, but it's a good point.
And
You're not
one,
gonna- If you give them 2 points, you're not going to get to the winning score.
If they're with as close as they are right now, you are, yeah. that's
so the
good.
minority, we give them 5 points, the minority, and it made a
Right.
difference. Because the last time we did that, guess what? If we didn't have that minority, you probably would have had 8 companies doing presentations. Because that 5 points made a difference, and it dwindled it down to 4. I was able to cut it at 4.
And where are we on local? Local,
For the construction,
yeah.
nobody puts in any,
We don't give any credit for local.
but
That's- so
we
there-
don't have.
So
no-
when we get to the construction management level, where we're, these larger projects, there isn't any local person that's bidding on this.
I wanted to ask about that. A suggestion was to offer multiple smaller contracts that would encourage local.
So the contracts that we're doing on the continuing contracts that are below the
Yep.
4 million, that's where we're really trying to reach out and engage those local people to help grow them up to where if they do work with us consistently and they're doing good work and they're growing their company, then at some point in time, hopefully they can start bidding on these projects too.
So we're working on a program right now to do that,
But I also will say
sometime in
by-
April.
Excuse me, by having the local preference, and I've seen 2 construction companies, smaller ones that partnered with the big boys, that they've grown together. So having that local preference encourages them to partner with a smaller contractor. That 100% worked.
And there is points assigned in the packet for that. So if you're in Lake County, it's worth 5 points. If you're 0 to 50 miles outside of Lake County, it's worth 4, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a clear 1-point difference if you have an office in Lake County, which with how it is right now would make a difference, at least in getting to the presentation phase.
But we're also going to be addressing local vendor preference in another policy.
Perfect, good.
But that's all, that's really subjective, and we've seen them say, oh, we're going to do 40%, 50%, and 60%, and it's not even, if you really talk about those that have tried, that those numbers are really hard to get to. So they're just blowing smoke.
I know.
Nobody's arguing to say, did you do it?
I'm just trying, I really am right now, look, you've seen the scores, 80.5, 80, I mean, the degree of separation is not much. I'm just trying to come up with a better way to have something, that everybody's happy with. I can't, we can't please everybody.
On the Exhibit A,
So-
the other handout that you got.
You mentioned the performance evaluations, is that addressed in here? I think that's a key.
Yeah,
This one?
no, this one.
We hadn't discussed that yet, but we will.
It shows
We will.
the points for distance, not obviously the points for all the other stuff.
Yeah.
One of the adaptations that Ollie's also looking at is getting more of a performance evaluation for those contractors that have done work for us in the past, and if we run into issues, and architects too, if we're running into issues, formally, documenting that so that when we're back in this process and we've got the same players coming back into the same conversation, we can we have documentation of some of the issues that we can weigh into that. So we'll be refining how, how we can address that in these points too, so.
I think that's really important, is the business relationship with a CM or an architect. I think that's really, really important.
Sure.
And you couldn't award some points for a scorecard, because when someone finishes a project, your team, or I'm assuming the team, gets together and closes out all the documents and how many punch list items they have to come back to, how do they handle warranties, all those things that happen in general construction. It seems like that would be a very important part of the consideration.
Yeah.
If you have past experience, what's your scorecard? And if you have past experience, no past experience with Lake County, you have a scorecard with another county. Right?
We agree with that, and that was the conversation we had, because I know every one of the presentations, you've asked staff to come up and to address that very question. So we said, we just make it as part of the process, and then you have that information on the front end about how they.
And that can
performed.
be added also into the past performance history.
Correct, yeah.
Yep. So.
If it enters your matrix on scoring, maybe that helps you
Yeah.
separate the rubber from the road.
For the presentation phase, the board's chair will determine the order based on preference. That was a recent add, because we didn't have any language on how to break a tie in a presentation, and we knew that we would probably need something. That it's not, it wasn't intended to bring the board chair back in and ask additional questions or weigh heavily. It's really just a tiebreaker. You got two qualified people, and other entities flip coins, draw straws. There's a lot of things, ways that you could legally do that, leave it up to some type of chance. And what we decided was it would be easier because you already have everybody's score sheets. So if it did result in a tie, you would just take the chair, whoever that would be, and say, well, this is how the chair did it, and that's the tiebreaker. So it wasn't really weighing heavily on anybody else's experience as it was just, that was how we broke a tie.
If there is a tie, what I thought we were doing was bringing them to the, are we talking about a tie after the short list?
After- the
presentation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So what happened on our last one was we didn't have this language in there yet.
Right.
And so we didn't have a designated way to break the tie. It just so happened numerically that it was, it made a lot of sense to drop the two off that weren't involved in the tie. And numerically, it happened to break the tie when you did that. And so we used that process to break that last tie.
That was very logical to me.
Yeah.
logical.
So what's wrong with that?
Well, it may not always logically work out, numerically work out, so it may not break the tie. But what we're talking about adding, and we'll talk about that, I think, next.
Yeah, if it,
Well, before you go,
this is only a one-time deal.
I understand, but before you go, you're saying that if there is a tie, if this is adopted, the way the board chair ranked the people is the way it will go?
Yeah, so you would, you all five would fill out your cards, and you would turn them into Ollie, and which is not always at the presentation, it could be the next day.
Yeah.
And then so if it's a tie, if we didn't have a way to break that tie, we would have to bring the board back in and say, y'all have a tie, you can figure out what you're gonna do. But we felt like the quickest way to do that without bringing everybody back in would be just to say, okay, well, we need a tiebreaker. So grab the chairs and say, the chair said this, and that's the tiebreaker for the rest of it.
Okay.
Well, I like the idea of breaking a tie, but I don't think I like that method. Because I can't guarantee the chair is always going to be the most knowledgeable of this particular topic, right? I mean, there are times where we all on the board will acquiesce to somebody else's experience or expertise, and
Well, so all five board members have not liked that idea.
okay, well, there we go.
So we are now,
We agree on that
so we
one.
are now
That's not
going
a tie.
to, we're
have a
now
new one.
recommending
Okay.
this.
Okay. Oh, very good. Okay, that was beautiful. That was a
yeah.
historical thing.
We had to take you there.
So the first bullet is exactly what we did on the last one, where we dropped the two
I thought
lowest
that was very
ranking.
logical.
And then re-ranking them based on just the two in the tiebreaker. If numerically that doesn't break the tie, then we would go back to the standard flip a coin or draw straws if it's a three-way.
Throw straws or
So
numbers or
we'll try the logical approach first. And if the logical way doesn't work, then we'll just go to chance.
We go to what?
Chance. Which would be flipping a coin. or
Flipping a
drawing
coin,
straw.
numbers, whatever, you know, just.
I like this. I don't have an issue with this at all. Now, I think on the villages, the next one we do, if we do have a tie, it is the chair's vote because that's how it's
It
written
is?
in that
It
bid.
is. It was done in the RFP that way, so
have
my
the tie.
advice is don't let it
Don't have a
tie.
tie.
How about the person who comes closest to the presentation time without going over? Winner. It works on Price is Right. It has for decades.
The one that gets closest without going over.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
I think we go to a bar and play 8-ball.
Darts.
I think you may have a clear winner, so.
So to be clear on this one with bullet point 1, so we're going to have 2 contractors that tie. We're going to throw out the bottom 2 if there's 4, and then we're just going to re-rank those
Yeah,
top 2.
ba-
only
based
the
on
ones that
intent.
tie.
So if somebody was ranked 3 and the other one 4.
How we broke this last time.
Yeah, so it's gonna be
Good.
1 and 2,
Yeah.
so.
And then if that still ties, then we flip a coin. I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's the,
I really don't go for the flipping the coin part. That sounds
I
bad.
it's the fairest way to do it. I don't know how else you do
I
it.
think it's just
I have
in
a
the
problem with
statute
flipping a
too.
coin.
Well, the federal government uses coin flips all the time.
Yeah, it's a real
Well,
thing.
And all
That might explain
municipalities,
some
they use them too here. I mean, all over. I was like,
That's not necessarily the example we want to follow.
Well, it depends on who owns the coin, but that's,
I feel like in 2016, an election was decided that in our county somewhere, wasn't it? One of the cities had
Maybe
had
one
an
of the
exact
cities. I
tie.
don't think it
Oh,
was
something crazy like,
Yeah.
yeah, or it came down to one
Yeah, I
vote.
think it was Mount Dora. Isn't it?
Mount Dora was the one that came.
was,
to my mind.
wasn't Secretariat flip a coin? Imagine that.
The board makes decisions by flipping coins.
Okay, are we good with this?
Yeah, I mean, you've got 2 fail-safes before you get to that option, which I think is clear. So hopefully we don't tie twice, or if not, we can just keep trying to break the tie. Because I know in the last one, I tried to break the tie in like 8 different methods that made rational sense on the numbers, and only 2 of them actually broke the tie, and one of the 2 was the one we went with, which made logical sense. So numbers aren't always your friend.
In my years of experience, I've never had a tie until I moved here. And we had 2.
Welcome to Lake County.
But then again, we've done all RFPs and there was a clear winner, so.
Don't be talking about how y'all used to do it up.
Okay, so.
Here you go.
Yes,
Back
sir.
up to
I got it.
There you go.
All right, so.
We felt like that we wanted to cover the
Yeah.
no contact period and bid protest in
Yep.
case if we had any vendors listening in today. This is part of our RFP document when we send it out. There is a board policy, which you're aware of because you create the policy. But basically just starts on the initial data release of the RFQ and continues to and including the date of the school board makes this determination to approve or reject the final. Vendors are directed not to contact any Lake County School District board member or personnel other than Ollie, the contact person that's listed in the RFQ, for any purposes related to the RFQ. Unauthorized contact of any Lake County School District board member or personnel may cause a rejection of a vendor's proposal. So it's pretty clear that if they have a problem, now this doesn't preclude them from showing up at a board meeting and putting in public comment. They still have an opportunity. So they still have an opportunity to reach out to the board in the sunshine and state their case if they had a problem with the issue. And then the next slide.
Wait, go back. So why would we have may be caused? And why would we not want it stronger with shall be caused?
We could do that. I'd like to. I think that would stop a lot of the reaching out to the board members in the
Because the may
past.
puts it could be ambiguous. Who's making that decision?
We can change
We
it.
could definitely do that.
We can change it. So,
And when we make that change, we will make that very clear to the people that.
yeah, because
that will.
it's in the language of the, our RFQs and we can implement it right away. So,
And this would also include communications to a proxy. So if they reached out to somebody in the community and then had that community person reach out to you guys, then that would still be an issue.
Where does it say that?
It just would. It doesn't say that in there, but it would.
Just cause.
It just would, because this happens.
No, should it say that?
Well, we can clarify that with them too, direct or indirect contact. So what is the process when there is an issue? And that would be the bid protest part. And this is per board policy also. They have to conform with Florida Statute 120.57. Vendors have up to 72 hours from award to recommend notice to file the intent. So they have to file the intent. They don't have to actually file the protest, but they have to file the intent within 72 hours. And that gives them 10 days to file the formal protest. So if you ever do get a phone call, I would recommend that you immediately revert them back to speaking to Ollie first.
Yeah.
And then if Ollie doesn't solve the solution or provide the solution that's adequate to them, that they go ahead and file that bid protest. And
If they contact us, then aren't they on the other rule where they could be
well, I would stop them immediately so that they don't violate that, and then revert them to speaking to Ollie. And then Scott Cole also had some ideas on how to handle a bid protest in the future, since we have had a couple of those recently.
Well, one of the things that 12057 allows you to do is if there's no disputed issue of fact in the protest, then the agency can hold its own hearing rather than sending it up to DOA and having an administrative law judge hear it. And it gives the agency the discretion to determine how that process will work. So the question is, if we have one of those, we thought we had one and it resolved, but if we have that, then what process would the board be interested in doing for hearing those protests? Typically, it's either a committee of a couple people, staff members typically, or you can have one person. You want to have somebody who understands general construction issues and that sort of thing. But it's up to you to establish a process. So I'll bring that up to the board to discuss if you have any preference on how you would like those things to take place, either one person or a committee, and who might be on those.
And this language is provided when we upload the results in vendor link, and also when we email the vendors. This is also attached to them that, these are the results, and everybody's aware of the results because they know about it right after at the end of the evaluation. Anyway, with the exception when we do the presentations, they still wait for it, but.
I think it's a board member. Did you want to have a discussion about who it should be now or no?
I think we can.
Were you asking for that?
We
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think definitely a board member and then a couple people that are industry specific to whatever the issue is.
Where would those industry-specific people come?
District. I don't see it going outside the district, really.
Where we run into problems is you want committee, whatever this committee would be made up, you would want it to not be the same people that were involved in the procurement process. So some of our departments, like facilities, are so small. But I think if we move forward on the last one, I had communicated to the superintendent of picking another division chief type person that wasn't involved in that. So if it's facilities and construction, it wouldn't be Mr. Carr or his staff. It may be somebody from safety and security or somebody from risk management or somebody else that may still have some of that construction knowledge, but would not be directly involved in that process.
But in a hypothetical situation, let's just assume maybe it's grass. I would want somebody that knows about grass. That's because probably the protest is going to have something to do with grass, right?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to have someone who is deep in knowledge about the topic of the proposal, but they need to be somebody who understands process, because most bid protests are alleging there's been a problem with the process of the bids. So you really want somebody who can understand what the rules are and then be able to apply those rules.
Like an internal auditor?
Well, that's interesting, since you might have one.
Or we don't.
Or you don't, yeah. But yeah, anybody just who has a good, mind. So if you don't have somebody, what I'm saying is if you don't have somebody who's an expert on grass, that shouldn't be a disqualifier from serving on
Is
that.
the reason for a protest it is based on some procedural error,
It-
right?
it-
But
correct.
also, can't it be based on the person saying there's no way they could do it for that price?
Pretty much no.
No?
That's a judgment call for the board and the process to make. It's really, you didn't, either there was a flaw in how you tabulated bid results, or you didn't give proper notice, or those are the type of issues that are really subject to a bid protest.
That concludes actually the CCNA. That's for the.
So before we go on, we've gotten various responses in the switch to having you guys view the presentation. So going forward, do y'all want to continue to do the presentations, the construction managers and architect? Do you want that to go back to staff and have us do it?
We're just going to do the short list, right?
Right now, we're doing the short list and you guys are doing the presentations. But that changed, that's new process that we started about 4 or 5 back. So I've gotten various feedback. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Some people would rather staff do it. So I was just going to give you guys an opportunity to figure out or give us direction on what you want to do in the future.
I prefer that we look at the short list, me personally,
What we're doing now.
what we're doing now.
So you guys are doing the
But
presentations.
sometimes-
You're so,
Yeah, so we're interviewing the short list.
we do the short list, but then they do the
Now,
presentation.
if you want to do in the short list, is that just, are you just looking at paper, or are they making a presentation to you?
No.
Just
no,
paper.
Paper only.
Just
You-
paper?
Yeah, just paper. You guys do, so the presentations come to you, we shortlist them for the presentation. We qualify them for the presentations.
That's how it works in my world, too. You got a phase 1 and a phase 2.
Yeah.
You get past phase 1. Phase 1 is thrown out, and phase
Yeah.
2 is all in the presentation, and whoever that committee is
And-
makes that decision.
And most of the heartburn's
But
gonna be,
we're not, everyone, we're only going to look at, I don't want to look at 7.
No.
no,
Right.
no, that's why,
Correct. Yeah, so the first one is just the paper, you grade it off the paper, and then when they come to that second body, us, then we just do it off the second piece.
that's where most of the heartburn is, where the scores are 80.5 and 80.6.
Right.
Right.
Who do you pick? I mean, that's how, really what it's coming down to, so.
We try to keep it to 3, but the points have been so close that we've had up to 5. But even then, there were 8 that were all within, 3 or 4 points of each other. So,
It's concerning. Yeah.
there's concern there, but we want to continue to look at how we're scoring and make sure that we've got good methods, so it may provide a little more separation in the future.
I like us seeing the short list after you make it the short list.
We'll continue
We can
doing
keep doing
that.
that.
I like that as well. I just, to your point, want us to continue to refine the scoring so that
Yeah.
it's more clear how we're ranking things. I don't need notes everywhere, but like it's 1 through 5 for this or whatever else. I like the ranking 1, 2, 3, 4 when the math works. I think that opens up more opportunities for the math not to work if we're just ranking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's only so many ways you can rank these things. That it's as long as we've got the cover of here's the criteria and here's what we're basing it off of, then it's just our judgment, which I'm good with at that point. I want the process to be clear and consistent so we can hopefully avoid.
And,
any
and it, and
problems.
it, and it takes training too for the evaluation committee,
100%.
which we spend time with them, and I keep spending time with them. And I think I'm going to do a formal training of how to go about evaluating.
So do you always use the same people to do the short listing?
We vary, but I'm leaning now towards hopefully create like 3 separate committees, like 5 each, and rotate them, or just have a pool of 15 people that I can just,
That you train?
Yeah, and then do actual formal training, and just go how to evaluate, what to look
I
for.
like that a lot.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm working on right now,
I like that.
so.
Can I just add that in order to effectuate the non-disputed fact bid protest, having a board member on there, we'll need to modify the policy to spell that out. So they'll have to come back at some point.
Anything else? Okay, policy 6320, and that's the purchasing and contracting for commodities and contractual services. I am asking the board to increase the superintendent signature authority limit from $50,000 to $200,000. That will not take us away from the actual, that we have to do bids for anything over 50,000. All I'm asking for is to increase that signature authority limit. I've done a study of the number of agreements that we've done for a period of time, and I found that 23% of the district's agreement fall within that range. So it will take some off your plate, but also too, it will streamline the procurement process to make it, speedy. And it's also one of the recommendations that the consultant came up with is that we need kind of to loosen up and not delay things so that vendors are also happy and we get the contracts quicker to them that way. And that has everything to do with invitation to bids and any contract for that matter. Want to add?
I don't have an issue with that.
No, I don't have an issue, but I have a question.
Yes.
Earlier, we talked about local, smaller vendors. Is this the process where a lot of them are used for the lesser amounts?
Yes.
So they could have several jobs that would equal to a greater amount, correct?
And that's when, it's actually, the 200,000 is actually, we look at the 50,000 threshold limit for any service. That's where the key for us, whether to go into competitive bid process or not. So we look at, do we spend that kind of money or more with a specific vendor, for example? And if that's the case, then we really have to go for a competitive bid process. Or collectively as a district, do we use this service or this commodity as a whole? And then that's when we say, okay, let's pool our purchases and try to get us a good deal and say, overall, our spend is that much. So let's go out to bid. So we don't have all these things. But yeah, for competitive bid purposes, it's 50,000 always.
What happens under 50?
They can select any vendor they want. So it makes it much easier to go to a local, just get a quote, local plumber, local electrician, local this, that fall under that. Up to 50,000, you don't have to have a competitive bid process.
And you're asking to move it to 200?
So it doesn't change the competitive bid, it just changes instead of us, right now, anything over 50, we have to bring to you guys and you guys have to approve because the superintendent's only authorized to sign off on things up to 50. We're asking, we would still have to go through all the same competitive bid processes, but if it's under $200,000, the superintendent could sign for it, it wouldn't have to come to you guys and you guys. And that was the recommendation in order to help streamline our processes to get contracts faster. Next.
Policy 6325, procurement for federal grants and funds.
So I'll talk on this one. So in board policy in the state of Florida, we have things that are exemptions to bid procedures or procurement procedures. And it's outlined by the state statute, and it's things like softwares, curriculum content, use of piggybacks, a couple of other things that are listed. And so you don't have to go out and do a formal bid process. There are exemptions that you can use or alternatives that you can use when you're doing the procurement. The federal government does not allow that. So anything over a certain amount has to be procured. And right now, we are set to 50,000. So anything over $50,000, you can't go out and get a piggyback for, or you can't go out and just go purchase the software or go purchase the curriculum material. You have to go through a formal procurement procedure. But the federal government allows you to move that limit up to $250,000. So this doesn't bypass any of our state or local processes, but where the state and local processes gives us the exemptions, this allows us to use the exemption up to $250,000 versus being restricted to $50,000. So it'll eliminate some of the additional requirements based on federal fund spending. questions on that one? Next.
Policy 6450, local purchasing. Proposing changing, adding language, actually, that deals with preference for local Lake County, Florida businesses in a competitive solicitation, and also define what local Lake County vendor is. Because the current policy doesn't actually talk about that. So the definition, this only applies to the primary vendor. The primary vendor should have fixed office or distribution point located in having a street address within Lake County for at least 6 months immediately prior to the issuance of a request for competitive bids by the district. So they have to be here at least 6 months before we issue a bid. Holds any required business licenses by the county or a city within the county. Employs at least 1 full-time or 2 part-time employees whose primary residence is located within Lake County, or if the business has no employees, is at least 50% owned by 1 or more persons whose primary residence is located within Lake County. And the third point, this local vendor preference shall not apply to any contract funded in whole or in part with the federal or state funds which do not allow. So
Some funding sources
some funding
require
do
that.
not allow, and
Yeah.
so, but other than that, it's a fair game. Any questions about this
So
definition?
this is the proposed language, or this is what? 'Cause
Yeah.
we don't have
No.
language right now.
So right now, our local preference says state.
State.
It doesn't restrict it
Yeah.
to our county.
So
This
we
would
want to
restrict it
add
our
this
county.
to it.
Understood. Now, in the exhibit here, what's the thought process on making this 6 months when this one says a year for the established
That's
presence?
construction management, so that's the CCM.
Sure.
This would be applying to all of the other stuff, like hard bids.
Yeah, but
And-
why, is there any particular reason why we just wouldn't want to match that for a year? Is there a thing for, I mean, I don't have a strong opinion, I'm
There's,
just curious why they.
there's no
they did
reason.
it. Okay.
More stuff for us to have to memorize.
We can change it to a year,
We can change it.
to be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I just-
Yeah.
Where are we going to, does it speak to it, what that, it's at 5%? Is that what it is? here?
We're coming to that.
Okay.
We're coming to that.
Hold my comment next, I have a strong opinion about that.
So this is just kind of defining what a
I'd
local,
like to see it a year just for consistency.
okay,
Okay.
we'll do a year.
We can do that.
Let me just make a note. All right. To address that, again, this applies to bids that will take the lowest bid price into consideration, meaning recurring services and commodities such as furniture, plumbers, electricians, and so on. Does not apply to architects and construction managers. If the local Lake County vendor comes within 5% of the lowest bid, then the local Lake County vendor will be awarded the bid. That's what I want to add. So they have to come within 5% of the lowest bid. Otherwise, lowest bidder will win. So,
And I'll give you my thought.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not sure where it fits in your slides, but kind of here. So I'm of the opinion that if an employer in Lake County who's paying school ad valorem tax, by the way, I think mine was $8,500, my building, that that amount that they're paying should be factored in somewhere. Like if your ad valorem is between, if you just rent an office, right, and so you can have a local business, and you're competing against me, who has 20 employees, I'm paying ad valorem, blah, 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 that the 5% would be great, but maybe if there's categoricals that say, if your school ad valorem, because you can present your tax bill, if it's between this and this, you get an extra point. If it's between this and this, 2 points, up to some number. That's what I think would really capture local. And not the guys that are working out of the back of their trunk, that real businesses.
So you're saying to that point, and I can follow it, it's creative and I can get behind it, but you're saying that the ad valorem in different tranches would lead to a point. So it wouldn't be someone with a massive company that then has all their ad valorem is the wiggle room between first and second. It just gets them another
Yeah, because they've gotten the investment. In
Right.
other words,
So-
they're making the
I
investment.
agree, but if you're paying $8,500, for example, let's use you, then you're thinking that that would be an $8,500 buffer?
No, I'm saying it would be worth a percentage point, not, I don't think you can apply the
So then you,
dollar amount.
okay.
So-
I think it's creative, I like it, but would you buy up from that 5%? That would,
Okay, well, that's what I'm open to discussion.
Okay,
That-
well,
that-
So right now, we just look at so we ask them for pricing.
sure.
And because the 99% of our business are Florida, so nobody gets that 5.
Sure.
Right, so we just look at straightforward, who's the lowest bid. This way, we say, okay, if you come within that 5% of that lowest price, we'll give you to, so I don't know what that 5% would look
So
like.
if you're a certain, so could we put in like, and if your school tax is over a certain amount, you could get 6% with that, and we would award it to you?
Yeah, that maybe,
Okay.
or categoricals because of range.
So you're thinking, so somebody who might have some sort of Lake County or municipal business license, but they're just working out of their garage, would they qualify for 5%, or
They're
should
getting
they
the
only
5
get
based
2%?
on- They're getting the 5 based on what we're saying. They're established business for 6 months or a year.
Carpetbaggers.
Well, they're getting the 5 over someone else. And all I'm saying is that, and that's a legitimate upstart business, by the way, so I'm not criticizing it. But for companies that then have
Create more
owned
economic
property, they're
impact.
creating
Yeah.
jobs.
The velocity of that,
and
sure. I mean,
Pay it ad valorem.
creative.
That I think that in addition to the 5, I suppose, it would be 1 or 2 or 3. I don't know what y'all are thinking, but that's where my head's at.
I'm hesitant to go too high on it, because certainly when I think about where we were funded,
tell them
it's
what
a hard
the consultant
justification to
said?
go back to the taxpayer and be like, hey, we were willing to pay 8% more for this job. When, we're 66.
No, but again, it goes back to, can you explain it? And if the company is paying $15,000 in school ad valorem with no burden on the district, should they have consideration? And I would submit to you, the answer is yes.
Well, so maybe what we look at, and we can come back with a couple of options, but maybe what we look at is doing a 3% and then an additional 2% or additional percent for each category above that, and try to come
I
up
wouldn't
with.
make it like too complicated, but range.
Right, a couple of ranges to get up to
Couple ranges
5%.
that-
Well, one of the things that we wanted to be careful of is the consultants discussed this out with several vendors, and one of the vendors in particular came back and said they did not like the idea of local preference. And it wasn't that they didn't like the idea of the local preference, but they do a lot of business outside of Lake County, and they were afraid that if another county took our policy and did it, then they would lose the ability to bid in those other counties. So there was, I think, just 1 or 2 vendors that were a little concerned about it, but the majority of them liked the idea. So I think it's the right direction to move towards. I just don't know that if you want to weigh it super heavy, then you really start to disrupt competition. I fear what will happen, the downside of this will be that your local vendors will think, oh, we have a local vendor preference and we can get 5%. So now we're going to add 5% to our costs. So we can always go back and assess that later if that is happening. I'm not saying that it will happen, but they have to be careful, because if they go too far, then they're going to lose the bid anyway. So I would suggest that we'll come up with some ranges, and we'll look at some vendors, some large vendors, and see what they're paying in taxes, and kind of develop some ranges again.
Well, is anyone saying that the 5% is the top? And we develop the down?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I think 5 should be the.
5 is the threshold, the high threshold, and you would get 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 5, up to.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
I'd like to see it with real numbers.
We'll look at some of our bigger vendors and see what they're paying in the community, and then we'll come up with some thresholds.
That's it.
Done?
Done.
Any questions for these gentlemen?
I just want to thank Natalie, because I'm finally falling out over here. You got a little brisk.
Okay.
Can I mention, I wanted to get back to Mr. Mathias about his question. I was doing a little research on the computer. There's nothing real definitive on this. This is on the, going from the first to the second to the third. But when I go back and I read the statute, and they use the words that you have to formally discontinue the negotiations, typically when you see that sort of strong language, the legislature is saying it's over. So it's my opinion that once you finish with the first, they're done.
So how do we change that?
You have some great lobbyists to understand, so.
Okay, Mr. Mathias, comments?
No, ma'am, I'm totally fine.
Mr. Dodd?
Me too. Have a great spring break.
Mr. Brandyberg?
All set. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mock. Thank you.
We,
Thank you for your service. Tom, you'll still be around, right? So thank you for your service.
yeah, we certainly, we appreciate all of your input, staff as well as our guest. Superintendent?
Give my thanks as well. They put a lot of time into this recommendation today, so thank you both. And also want to thank the Education Foundation for a great night of stars last night.
Mr. Cole?
I'm good.
Okay, if nothing further, we're adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're just gonna work, the 5 is the max.
Then we'll work down from there, and I'll help you, I'll go.
If it's the max, just give it the. Okay.
I see a point there, because so I'm a consultant, and I'm local Lake County. Obviously I can't do anything here, but like I have zero expenditure, I pay zero taxes additional for my consulting business, so it's just, but if you own the concrete plant down there, that's worth billions of dollars, and you're doing a portable, which we do, then I could see where that would, you get more right here, I'm telling you, the mentality of the grass people, we're going to charge whatever we want to, we're local, and you got to give it to us.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, that's not what it says.
I know.
So.
Thank you for your support.